The title I have tonight is Deep Knowledge and Measuring Time in Ballyhoura. What does deep knowledge mean? Deep knowledge means what you know. Do you know after a funeral and you go home and you're having a cup of tea and a slice of cake or something like that, and you're sitting around the table and somebody is talking about what Granny said or what Granny's aunt said? That's deep knowledge. Now, I don't know that. I'm fabulous in a graveyard. I know how to number headstones and record them and so on, but I don't know the people in the parish. I don't know the people from the place, whereas ye do. Ye have that deep knowledge. And that's what we're going to try to tap in as part of this project, is what we've been learning over the last decade in terms of doing the project. The other title is Measuring Time. How do we measure time in Ireland? Nowadays we measure by looking at our phones. And I'm late, and I must get the children from school, or there's a match on, and how do you find the pitch? But in the past, how we measure time was by generation. So we measure time by our granddad's time or our great-grandmother's time. And that's what we're looking at here. Can we go back to that older way of looking at generations? Our primary purpose in doing that is we want to go back 200 years. We want to go back 8 generations to the 1820s in this area and work out who was living here, where we were living. And our primary drive for that is this Peter Robinson assisted immigration that Amanda mentioned earlier. In 1823 and 1825, a whole load of us were shipped away across to Canada. The first bunch went to the Ottawa Valley. The 1825ers went to Ontario, the Peterborough area in Ontario. And we're still there. The people who live there look like us, sound like us. Well, sorry, don't sound like us. But they look like us. I was following one of them on Facebook, and I thought he was a farmer in County Limerick. But he's a farmer called Patrick Leahy in Ontario in Canada. It's us just across there. And what we're trying to bridge the gap that's between us. And we're trying to show what the ordinary people on the ground have in common with one another, regardless of where we are. The project I'm going to show now is based on archaeological principles, but it's not led by, I call myself the project director, but I'm not the project leader. It's community groups actually lead the project, and I'm going to explain how in a moment. You'll recognise Doreen here in the photograph. Around 2012, 2013, Amanda drove one of our first large projects, surveying a whole bunch of graveyards in County Limerick, and Doreen was one of the key people involved in it. And as a result, we have a big chunk of County Limerick surveyed because of people like the Ballyhoura Development Company, and because at the grassroots level, local people like Doreen getting involved. And out of it, what we developed is a system whereby we could actually attach names to places. As an archaeologist, I was interested in the stones. It's crazy when I think of it. I was interested in the headstones. There's certain types of headstones from the 1700s which I think are very interesting. The height of them, the width of them, the thickness, the carving that's on them. But that's what I was started to study. But after a very short amount of time, I realized I had it all wrong. I had it completely backwards. And really what we were studying was families instead, and we were studying the history of families in our parishes, and that the headstones were a place where our family names were carved in stone with dates, and they were pinned in the landscape. And what we realised is that every 10 to 15 miles there's a different fingerprint of surnames, there's different accents, there's different surname groupings, and by recording the headstones we're deeply investigating those groupings of families and so on. So I tend to see now clouds of surnames over a graveyard. That's how I envisage it. And each cloud is different to the next one along. 6 miles away, 8 miles away, wherever the next graveyard is, you'll see a different cloud of surnames, and I'll explain that in a bit more detail in a minute. The website that I run, it's a web platform, is called historicgraves.com. If you're halfway interested in family genealogy, if you're halfway interested in tracing your family tree, go to historicgraves.com, click on the Explore button, and then click on names and search for your family names. And we've got 800 graveyards up online now in the last decade. And there's a chance, there's a good chunk of them in Munster, so there's a chance that you'll find some of your family headstones inside on that website. This is the most recent map that we have for County Limerick. There's 116, there we are. We've surveyed 116, and when I say we, it was ye in a lot of cases. Each night where I've been giving this talk, there's 4 or 5 people in each room who actually did the work. and we have graveyards done all over the county. West Limerick Leader also supported us, and Ballyhoura were actually one of our main drivers. This is what we're at this year now. We're calling it Ballyhoura 2020 in-house, and these blue pins are the map of the graveyards that we want to be looking at now in the coming few months. We have 35 or 36 graveyards in the county that ain't done yet, and we're hoping that, just as in the past, that the local community groups will activate with us and they'll come into the graveyard with us over a couple of days. It's not a big ask. A lot of the small graveyards we'll do in a day, and the average graveyard we'll do in 2 days. And we've refined our systems in the last 8-9 years, so we actually can get an awful lot done. You can see we're down here, Churchtown. There's a couple over around Churchtown, over around Charleville, heading up beyond Fina, that we want to do. So we're looking for people. There might be people in your family, people who can't be here tonight, but if they're interested, keep an eye out. We're going to publicise this and email people out in coming weeks to where we're hoping to go and set the schedule across the next few months, and hopefully people will come. Occasionally people will come into the graveyard with me and they're gone out the gate within an hour. They'll say, "Oh, Janie, I forgot the child's at school and I must pick them up." And basically they're saying, "Not for me." And that's fine, but mostly what happens is people come into the graveyard and they love it, because you're in front of a headstone for 10 minutes reading it from start to finish, and it's kind of peaceful and it's calming, and it's like a Sudoku or a crossword at the same time. People enjoy that, and as well as that too, we're actually remembering people. This, my mum and dad live over outside Kilfinnan, and if we go into Old Kilfinnan graveyard, this headstone is in the back of the graveyard there, and that's the average kind of headstone that you'll see. It's a high quality one, but when we visit, we read everything that's on that there. This stone of sorrow, and there's IHS up top there, was erected by Anne Raleigh in memory of her beloved husband, Richard Raleigh. So we read all that, we write it all down, and I like to think we're visiting the grave again. Some of the graves mayn't have been visited for a long time, but when we're there, we are there, and we're remembering those people. And sometimes, if we get lucky, we visit them on the day of their anniversary. And I'm an archaeologist, I'm a scientist, and I'm quite technical about all these things, but I love when we visit a grave on the day of its anniversary. You know, it's a nice kind of touch, and I think it just shows the humanity of what we're at. Another thing I love about this particular headstone is that it's carved by one of the Bolster family, and the Bolsters were some of the top end stone carvers anywhere in Ireland, and they were based in Charleville. And we have their headstones. Is it Kilnabraher out the road. The first time I saw, I had been following the Bolster headstones, but they were never signed. You could tell by the style of this carving that it was a particular style of cutting, and the same person or the same father and son team doing it. And it was in Kilnabraher where we first found the signed Bolster carved at the bottom of the stone. And after that, then we found something like 80 Bolster headstones from Tullylace all the way over to beyond Kilfinnan. And they're works of art in the landscape, and I love them. And other headstones we record in are just like this. It's a simple little field stone, deliberately chosen to slope up to the left, and then they hadn't the proper hammer and chisel or a bit like that. They hadn't the money to pay somebody to carve the stone, but they scratched a cross on it, and they scratched the initials PB and K, a Burke or a Bresnahan or a Brosnan or something like that, in a graveyard in Brigown over in Mitchelstown. So I don't care whether you had 1,000 acres or no acres at all. If you had a stone or a hump or a hollow in the graveyard, we're going to try and record your grave. And that's the system that we've done. We've done 800 graveyards, 600 of them were done by community groups. Every single headstone, whether it was an iron nail in the wall or a great big marble edifice, has all got a number and has all been recorded. We're all equally important. It's all a democratic process. This is what the individual graveyards look like on the website. There's a signature photograph, there's a geolocation, there's a map. If somebody is tracing their family tree and they're over in Perth in Australia and they're planning to come to this neck of the woods to trace their family tree, they can get the actual coordinates of the graveyard and of the gravestone if they want from the website, because there's a little GPS in the camera that we take the photographs with, and that's what they see when they try to plan their holidays. And every single headstone, the average Irish rural graveyard has 84 headstones. There's a fact. The average graveyard we do is about 200 headstones. So in 2 days with a team of about 6 or 8, we can easily do 200 headstones. And if you come along, that's the kind of work that you'll be doing. There's very little talking. This is the most talking you'll hear from me if you come along as part of this project tonight. Otherwise, there's 5 minutes introduction when we're there, and after that we just work. We split up the tasks and we just work. And I think it represents a lot of the Irish rural ethic, which is get the job done. Keep working. We start around 10, around half 12, then we'll have a cup of tea and a sandwich, and then we'll keep working again until 4 o'clock, and we have a huge amount done within 2 days. How do we do the survey? 3 simple steps is really basically, we stick a number on every headstone, and how we do that is masking tape and a marker. So we write the number with marker on a bit of masking tape, and we stick that on the side of every single headstone. We usually start at the back left-hand corner of the graveyard. The headstones are all facing east, so like you're all facing me now, the headstones are all facing one direction. So if I was to survey ye as headstones now tonight, I'd start with that lady in the corner, I'd put a number on her shoulder, and then the chap alongside him, he'd get another one on the same shoulder, and I'd come along line by line by line. And usually after an hour and a half or 2 hours, we've everything numbered. Somebody takes a photograph of all of those with a GPS camera, and then step 2 is we get out a sheet of paper and a clipboard, and we fill out every bit of carving that's on that headstone. Here lies the body of Mary Murphy, who departed this life. The thing is, once you learn the formula that was used for actually carving or for inscribed on the headstones, they become easy enough to read. Takes about an hour to learn what I know. And then after that, ye become the experts. I know when Amanda must have done half the graveyards that we did with us, she was an expert. Doreen was an expert in reading the headstones too. And some people get it even quicker than I did. I had the advantage, I spent a year developing the system. And so I took a year to learn, whereas I ask ye to do it in 10 minutes. So it's a challenge, like it's good for you. So 3 simple steps. Oh yeah, the third step then, we do a relative location sketch plan. So I would then go down to the lady in the corner, and I'd say the number 1, number 2 alongside her, number 3, number 4, and it all gets drawn on a single A4 sheet of paper. In the old days, archaeologists used to get paid a couple of grand to do a total station survey of a graveyard. It would take a week, and it would cost a few grand. Now we do it in an hour, and we pace it out. We don't use a measuring tape or nothing like that, and it all gets done rapid. We scan that goes up online, because the person who's from Perth in Australia who wants to come and visit, let's say Tower Hill or Kilbraher, they want to be able to find number 56 in the middle. They get that from the drawing, and then they go down and they find the graveyard. And that's the approach that we take. It's low tech. The most important tool that we use is masking tape and a marker. Once you stick the number on the headstone, it takes all the tension off it, it takes all the bother off it. Instead of saying go down to look at that big one, you say go down to find number 13, and then then they go down and record that. And a trick we learned in subsequent years is after number 14, let's say, is done, you put a big X on the number, and then everybody else knows that number 14 is done. Very simple system like that. Very simple, but it took us a while to learn it. Over 9 years of doing this repeatedly, week after week with community groups, each group has brought little improvements to the system, and we're a very efficient unit now. When it comes to reading the headstones, I find it relaxing, and I find it challenging at the same time. You look at a headstone, you think, crikey, we'll never read that, and then 5 minutes later you're done. The system that we use is we use a simple torch, this class of a yoke here. We just shine it along the face of the stone, and it picks up the shadows on the stone, and that's how we read the headstone. People say to me, John, rub a sop of grass on it, and I say, yeah, I'm not too keen on that. The 2 techniques I use are the flash lamp and a mirror. If the sun is gone behind the headstone, I'll bounce the sunlight with a mirror across the face of the stone, and I can read it then as if it's fully illuminated. This is an example of a very interesting headstone that we get. This is an Irvin headstone, E-R-V-I-N, Ellen Irvin. I love that because it's spelled Irwin now, but it was pronounced Irvin, and it's still pronounced Irvin down in this pocket of County Limerick. But when Ellen's headstone went up first, she was only 15, but they got her dates wrong. And they put down that she was, when we recorded it first, we put down March the 25th. But then when we were reading 25th, we realised there was an ND over the 2. So was it the 2nd, or was it the 5th, or was it the 25th? We had 3 options on that particular one. So it was an immediate puzzle, and it was fascinating. And we spotted it one night. There was a mass, I think it's a Clonkeen. Is Clonkeane graveyard out the other side, or Clonmean? No, my graveyards are escaping me. We were there for a mass one evening, and it was dusk, and we got down with the torch, and we picked it out. But what we realised was actually the whole date was completely wrong. If you look at the end here, it's 1826, but there's a 5 under the 6. So whoever gave the stone cutter the dates, they got the wrong date altogether. And even the March is wrong. Under the M is an O, under the A was a C, the R was a T, so it was October. So they polished down the stone and they recut it like that. And we find things like that in every single graveyard. And it's a great way of exploring who was buried or who lived in a place. Now what I love about this one, whether it was 1825 or 26, poor old Ellen died the same year that all the families from the Peter Robinson's second batch of ships went out. So we're looking at a contemporary headstone to that particular period. Everything goes online, but also everything's recorded on paper, and we fill out a whole load of sheets rapido, and they all get stuck onto a folder, and that folder then it stays locally. The data that goes up online is copyright of the funding body and of the local group. It's not mine to keep. We download copies of it for the community again, and we also ask that the community will share it with the County Council, Library Service and with the Heritage Council. So it's multiple copies in multiple locations, and it's not in anybody's corral. It's not like John Tierney is going to keep all the data for himself. In fact, it's all up online immediately. There's no advertising on it, and it's shared with anybody who wants it immediately. Another part of the project that we do is we record the stories, because what was happening for me, I'd be recording Headstone 1, Headstone 2, Headstone 3, and then one of the local team would start telling me stories, and they'd be telling fascinating stories about individuals. So he was very tall, or he married into a farm, or she was a fantastic teacher, or she was a brute of a teacher. We would get all those kind of stories. And then the local historian would come in and they would tell us important kind of long researched stories about the graveyards. So what we started to do, we started to bring out recording devices with us into the graveyard as well. So if we record a particular headstone, and that headstone was significant historically, then and a local historian comes out to us, they'll stand by the grave, we'll put the microphone up to them and we'll record that story from them live inside in the graveyard. We can then upload the MP3 of that, we attach that to the grave, and then it's actually live on the website too if anybody wants to hear that. And they don't hear John Tierney with his kind of half of a Cork, half of a Waterford accent telling a Dromina story. They hear the local people and the people who are based locally telling their own stories. The other the devices we use for this are things like this Zoom audio recorder, a GoPro. If you have a little GoPro at home, they're fantastic. They have settings that you can actually set to record at television levels of quality. So inside in the graveyard, we ourselves, we set up the GoPro. Here's this one here working away. We can just point it at somebody and we'll capture them telling. And if Ballyhoura wants, or if the community wants, we can get that as part of a television program in the future as well. We archive it until then. When we're long gone, these stories will be recorded and archived long into the future as well. And then also we have little audio devices like this one here. I have it clipped onto me. What we very often do is we'll clip this on, if there's a local historian, we'll clip this onto their collar and we'll walk around the graveyard with them. And instead of putting them under the pressure of saying, sit down now, Mikey, and tell us all the stories, we capture it live as they walk around. And it's a remarkable little device. And again, you can get broadcast quality out of that too, that can be used in radio documentaries and so on. So we're trying to do all that. And what we're hoping to do is we're hoping to tell the stories of the people who lived in these parishes going back to 200 years. So after the famine, or let's say the War of Independence, the First World War, after the famine, life here during the famine, life here before the famine. And we want to capture those kind of stories. And what I know is that very often there are local history societies who've been doing all this work for the last 30, 40, 50 years. And we want to build on that and modernise it and get it out there as well. And we want to get it out there so we can share with our partners elsewhere in the country and across the water in Canada as well. When it comes to actually telling stories in the graveyards, I tend to take a mobile journalism approach rather than, I kind of view it as heritage journalism. So we can't train people to be historians, we can't train people to be archaeologists, we're only with you for 2 days, but we can tap into your natural ability to tell stories, and we use a couple of little simple approaches to do that. If we record a video story, we have something called the 5-shot rule, that we'll use to actually record that story. And if we're doing audio recordings, we do the 4 Ws and the 1 H. Who did what, where and when, and how did they do it? So we'll talk to somebody on a Thursday, we'll prime them with the 4 H's or the 4 W's and the H, and then on Friday they'll come into us ready to tell the story on that basis, and we record them then, whether on audio or on video, and then we publish it to Historic Graves. So if you come into us in the graveyard, or if you're coming into us and you have a neighbour who has the stories but who doesn't want to come in and record the headstones, then can you bring them into us as well, and we'll try and capture their stories too. Some people are shy of the microphone, but a lot of people want to be heard, and they want to pass on the deep knowledge that they have, that I mentioned at the start, and that's how we're going to do it. Now, a lot of this comes together with the Peter Robinson Assisted Emigration. When Amanda first put us onto this particular project, onto the assisted emigration, I thought it was unusual, I thought it was rare, but since we've been doing the research on it, we started work on this around 2015. We found out 2,000 people were shipped across to Canada back in 1823 and 1825. Pretty much from Newmarket in Duhallow all the way down to Lismore in County Waterford. 2,000 people in this particular, let's say this Blackwater Valley area, were all given an option to transplant out to Canada. And that's what the Peter Robinson Assisted Emigration was. And the anniversary of this is coming up in 2023, and both communities here in Ireland and across in Canada want to commemorate this, and they want to get their act together and to be ready for 2023 and for 2025. So we envisage that there's going to be a series of actions that relate to this commemoration in 2023 and 2025. And that Peter Robinson, though it's not just Peter Robinson that's important, there were multiple other assisted emigrations. During the famine and after famine, we were hounded out of the country, but before that it was happening as well. If somebody said, we'll pay you to go and we'll give you a farm on the other side, even though it's in the middle of a blizzard-ridden country and with a different type of agriculture and so on, a lot of us had to go. Over 300,000 Irish people went with assisted emigrations. Peter Robinson is only 2,000, but if we can tell their story well, we can publicise the other ones as well. And if we can make the links across the water with the Peter Robinson generations, maybe others of the other 300,000 will connect with us too. So 1822 and 1823, 8 different landlords picked most of the 2,000 people. They picked families, young families, and mostly Catholics, and they were sent abroad. No person over the age of 45 would be accepted. And what happened is the first crowd went out to the Ottawa Valley, and the second group went out to the Peterborough area, and some of them made a real go of it. A lot of them then actually just spread across the rest of North America. So the descendants of the Peter Robinson settlers are all over North America. And Ballyhoura have made a very good job of actually tracking them. And when we're dealing with communities here, we also want to be dealing with communities across in the States and across in Canada. So it's going to be both sides of the Atlantic because of the digital revolution. And that's why I'm here with the camera on me tonight. We're recording this so we can share it with people across in the States and in Canada, and we can get people acting over there. They'll have different accents to us. They won't have a Dromina or a South Cork or a North Cork accent, but they might well have stories and memories that relate, that go back 8 generations. And the question is, do we have stories that go back 8 generations? I was with my mother today, and she went back certainly to the 1870s, just in casual conversation. And I suspect a lot of us can go back to the 1870s. Her grandfather was born in 1875. So if we have those links back to the 1870s, can we then push it back another generation or 2? That's really what we're asking. And if we can understand the Ireland of the 1820s and the 1830s, from listening to historians, it was a very different place to what we're talking about today. There was a lot of feuding going on, family feuding between the families. There was a lot of agrarian unrest. People were fed up with the way their land was being controlled, that they couldn't own land, that the taxes that they were being put on them and so on, and there was an awful lot of trouble and violence out there. And then as well, there was a famine every 20 years. We remember on Gurta Moor from the late 1840s, but there was a famine nearly every 20 years before that anyway. And that's what people were putting with. And at the same time, population levels were shooting up. So it was a very different place than what we're at now. The population levels never recovered since on Gurta Moor. But if we can actually make those connections internally and get our friends across the water to make those connections too, then that's what our purpose is. They went out on 11 ships, 2 ships in 1823 and the other 9 then in 1825. And we have the ship's passenger lists, and we also have Peter Robinson's own records of the different families that were accepted to go out. A number of Protestant families and predominantly Catholic families. Some people met and fell in love on the boat and married when they got out to Canada. Some people died on the ships. It was a very different variety of success. Previously, in 2015, we tried to trace a number of the Peter Robinson families here in the county. On the Historic Graves project, we had a separate webpage. We traced 16 graveyards connected to the Peter Robinson families, and now we're going to try and connect even more and record in those graveyards. These were the 16. It wasn't just it wasn't just Ballyhoura. We went down into Cork Harbour and over all the way into County Waterford as well. And we traced the graveyards. And I think what I came to realise is that a lot of the ruined churches and the standing churches were standing in 1823 and in 1825. A lot of the churches that the people who went across on the ships got married in are the same churches we're getting married in. So I was trying to think, what would they recognise from here? Would they recognise this boreen? Would they recognise that bridge? Would they recognise, and that's the kind of way we started to think in terms of doing this project. And there is a lot there that would be recognisable, I do think. But there's an awful lot new as well. Another key question I'd really love to find out is, where did people live? Have we got houses here in the parish that were built before the 1820s? And it's only ye as the local experts will know that. A lot of our rural housing was built after the famine, but there's more there that was before that too, and you'll know some of them. When we record in the graveyards, I mentioned earlier, this is a graph. This shows in Tower Hill graveyard, the larger the surname, the more commonly it is carved in stone inside in that graveyard. So I consider that a name cloud. And it's sort of a statistical representation of the families in this end. This is up around Cappamore, up towards the Tipperary border. You can see there's a rake of Ryans in there. There's Maddens, McGraths, O'Connells. That wouldn't necessarily fit with the year range of surnames that you have down here in the Dromina area. This is the same technique used on the first ship that went out in 1823. There's Sheehan's, Buckleys, Forests. Have you Forests around here? Back. Yeah. They're the same ones I know, so yeah. Bresnahans, Sullivans, Nagels, Slatterys. It's more of a mix, but it's very definitely a monster suite of surnames. And then as we went on and looked at the other ships, that they vary somewhat. So we're going to try and connect the ship's passengers with our graveyards. And Paul McCotter, who's a medieval historian and a genealogist, has looked at a lot of the ship's passengers, and what he's found out is that he reckons that 25% of the Peter Robinson families can be found in church records. So even though it's 1823 and 1825, a quarter of them are traceable to a parish. 10% are traceable to a townland. So we can go to the townlands that they came from. There might be a very different suite of families there today, but there might also be branches of their own family. And what's been going on over the last decade in particular is that the Peter Robinson families have been coming back and meeting up with those people. We want to multiply that and find out more of them. And what Paul McCotter said ultimately is that he thinks that 40% of those emigrant Peter Robinson families will be locatable to some particular location back here. Now, who were those Peter Robinson families? If we go here by the surnames, Charleville area, Benson, Buckley, Dowling, Fitzgerald, Hamilton, Houlihan, Jessup, Kennedy, Churchtown, there's Pigots, Powers, Purcells, Regans. So we've gone through the church records to see have we got baptism or marriage records and so on. So we've done a lot of that. So we kind of know where they're coming from in terms of a particular parish. Liscarroll, Donohue's, Fitzgerald's, Guineas, Lynn's, Leary's, McConnell's. Does that sound like the same kind of range of surnames getting over now? Yeah. So Shinnick. So we're seeing potential linkages. Now, we're not expecting to say, this is a direct line between those, but sometimes a family might well be in their farm going all the way back to the 1820s. My mother is convinced that our Careys are in the same townland there since before the famine. Now, she's saying that because of what Auntie Rita told her and what Auntie Mary told my father, you know, that kind of thing. But we don't have it in documentation, we don't have it in paper research and so on. So we want a mixture of both. We want a mixture of what's spoken about around the kitchen table and also what's in the historic texts. As I'm coming to the end here now, in Amanda's office, they set up a Facebook page to link with the Peter Robinson families. So they've traced something like 600 different people over in North America, between Canada and the USA, who are direct descendants of those 2,000 people. And they're all over the States. They're all over the States, they're all over Canada. And we're going to, as part of this process, we're going to connect with them and we're going to get their story. And we're going to try together and plan a series of activities over the coming 3, 4, 5 years that will actually bring us back together. The purpose, as part of this, what I'm hoping is, I'm asking a lot from the local experts. I'm asking you to come along and help us survey some of the graveyards. I'm asking you to dig out the stories, to dig out people who know the stories and introduce us to them. And also, if you've got links with communities that, if, for instance, in Dromina, if you already have twinned with the community in Germany, or if you've links with communities over in the States, then we're very interested in hearing that too, because we want to actually get a media coverage for the whole project over there as well. And that we want to connect us together. Even though the economy and society split us in the past, we think we can connect again in a good way, connect in a positive way. So, next steps. We're visiting all of the graveyards now at the moment. This is our first time to meet communities. We're going to meet communities in a different way, in a more formal training way in the coming weeks. But in about a week's time, we're going to have a provisional schedule made out, and we're going to email that out to anybody that we got an email from tonight, and we're going to say, we're going to be in your neck of the woods for these 2 weeks. Can you come for a day? Can you come for 2 days? And if you can, then we'd be delighted. Like I say, with 6 people, I can get a whole graveyard done fairly quickly. With 16 people, I can get a whole graveyard done in a day. We've done it in recent times. Last summer we had 16 people in a graveyard in Kilmurray in County Cork, and we got 200 headstones done in one day, start to finish. So if we can get a good take-up in the field, we can actually achieve an awful lot. We can also, very often we need somebody then who will type up record sheets and things for us. What I love doing sometimes is a 6th class of a national school or a transition year class in a secondary school. So if we could connect into the secondary schools and try and grab a TY class for 2 days even, then they can actually help the local community quite a lot. So if you know teachers, TY teachers, 6th class teachers who might be interested in this, it's fabulous to get a school child into a graveyard. And what we do with them is we get them to do rubbings. They put a sheet of paper on a headstone and they rub a sponge with carbon paper on it, and they get a 1-to-1 copy of the headstone. And if that headstone was like the Irvine one earlier, which was 1827 or 1825, and it connects with the same era as the Peter Robinson families, then it's a way of actually starting to create those kind of connections with the young people too. Because when we're long gone, we want to have the same draw for the culture and for our place that we do as well. So what we're hoping is, in coming weeks, you'll get emails from us. David White, who's Amanda's colleague, is running a lot of the communications on this. Or there's myself, John at historicgraves.com. If you think it's interesting, if you have any ideas, one of the key things we do is we listen. We take on the local knowledge. Feel free to get in touch with us, and hopefully when we set out the schedule, that I'll meet you again inside in the graveyards and for an enjoyable couple of days. Thank you very much.